Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of our live talks. This is the 14th edition. I'm so happy to have this amazing guest here. Today, we are talking about AI governance, hot topics, key concepts, and best practices. And I'm here with Kris Johnston, Alexandra Vesalga, Ravit Dotan, and Katharina Koerner. Before I introduce them, and let's give some 2 or 3 minutes for everyone to join. So please let me know in the chat where are you connecting from. And if you have already any questions or something that you think about AI governance, feel free to post in the chat. So Alexandra Vesalga. Hi, Alexandra, welcome. So happy to have you here today. She's the founder of AV Privacy. Kris Johnston. Hi, Kris. She's Associate General Counsel, AI Privacy and Security of Affinity. Katharina Koerner. She is the responsible AI advisor at the Tech Diplomacy Network and the Corporate Development Manager at Daiki. And Ravit Dotan. Hi, Ravit. She is the CEO of Tech Better. So I'm so glad to have you here today. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for accepting my invitation. Today is a very dense session. We will cover 6 topics. So if you registered, you know already, you saw the list of topics. So I recommend you stay until the end. There will be practical advice, important knowledge, especially if you're not aware. So next week, there will be the final voting for the AI Act. So for those that are waiting for the final text, so there will be big news next week. So it's the perfect time to discuss AI governance and this aspect of implementing AI governance in an organization. Before we start, a reminder that next week we have the 4th cohort of my Privacy Tech and AI Bootcamp. Is a 4-week program. So if you didn't register yet, you're welcome to contact me. Everybody watching this session will get a 10% discount. So let's start. We have a lot to cover today. I will go straight to the questions, and I hope you enjoyed the session. So the first question is about hot topics. I want to hear from the guests. In your view, what are currently the hottest topics in the context of AI governance, and why? Why do you think those are the hottest topics? So who wants to start?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. Thank you so much. Yes, so I'm happy to chime in on this question. Such a great question. I'll just quickly note to start that the views I'm sharing today are mine and don't relate to any specific company. But the first hot topic I'd like to call out is the increasingly complex regulatory landscape and its impact on organizational AI governance programs. Consider, for example, the landmark soon-to-be adopted EU AI Act, and then widen the lens a bit and consider the fact that the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development is tracking over 1,000 AI policy initiatives from 69 countries, territories, and the EU on the website oecd.ai. It's a lot. And then let's zero in specifically on the US. Legislative momentum is growing on a state level for AI. An industry report from last fall found that state lawmakers introduced 440% more AI-related bills in 2023 compared to the prior calendar year, a metric which includes legislation focused on specific AI use cases, including use of AI in healthcare, financial sectors, and employment contexts, AI governance frameworks, state AI use inventories, task forces and committees, law enforcement use of AI, state government use of AI, and so many other elements. And by mid-January this year in 2024, lawmakers in at least 20 states pre-filed or introduced 89 bills or resolutions specifically referring to AI. And then layer on top of all of this activity, the number of voluntary frameworks and standards to consider for AI governance, including, but not limited to, the NIST AI Risk Management Framework, the new ISO 42001 standard, the world's first AI management system standard. The overall complexity of this landscape is a hot topic by itself. And then the second hot topic that I'll just briefly note is the fact that many AI governance professionals feel like they're walking on a tightrope in an F5 tornado. That's a pretty strong tornado, to say the least. I think about the movie Twister when I think about an F5. On a daily basis, AI governance professionals are getting hit with 3 moving factors in particular. Number 1, the rapidly developing AI technology. 2, rapidly developing regulatory landscape globally. And then 3, their company's interest in and use of AI, and also potentially development of AI as well. And when I refresh my LinkedIn feed alone, and I'm sure everyone can relate to this, I see a number of updates about the latest AI developments from both a technological and regulatory perspective, in addition to industry-specific implementation guidance, especially in the healthcare sector. In fact, I, along with other attorneys interested in ethical AI, are tracking and curating these developments on a new LinkedIn page called the Responsible AI Resource Collective, or the RARE Collective for short. There's so much to share every day, including great content from my fellow panelists. There's so much happening every day. So overall, I would say it's important to accept that the tornado isn't going to let up anytime soon. Just accept that it's there. It's a bit windy, and we need to adapt to it. A key question is how to consistently remain balanced given all of these developments. It's truly fascinating. So that requires, in part, having a strong human in the loop tightrope, your AI governance program, while also being nimble and flexible and staying on track on top of the latest developments externally as well as internally within your organization, so you can adjust your balance accordingly.
So if we thought that the privacy tornado was bad, the AI is worse, right? So
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Thank you, Kris. So who would like to share the thoughts next?
I can go next.
Yeah.
So the topic I see being really super important and on top of the list is open source versus proprietary as models. So there's this whole discussion about like what is open source AI. I'm glad that the open source initiative is working on a working definition, because open source in general is traced back to open source software, and that's coming from OSI. And also I think in practice it's also relevant for companies, because would I take a proprietary model and also rely for liability on, I don't know, Microsoft and Google's promise to, cover any liabilities that might emerge from copyright issues? Or do I build my own RAG system and buy a model, or take an open source model and work with it? But what would then happen with any downstream issues, copyright issues in that open source model? So I think there are a lot of open questions also around licensing. Maybe do the open source software licenses really cover models to a full extent? So I think that's a hot topic. Second hot topic, and maybe that should be actually first, is still bias. And so as we see with the latest news, Microsoft having diverse Nazis, I mean, that's really really so out of proportion. And I think that there are a lot of attempts, of course, to address this, but we do not know how to get this could get solved in general. Plus, I think on a very practical level for organizations, for data scientists, in machine learning engineers in organizations, there's also not this set of good governance, good operationalization of trustworthy guidelines for bias. So do this. So I think it would be great that some organization or us come up with a really good overview, because I still hear a lot of questions about, like, I want to do it right, but how? And the third topic, I thought I'm going to add a third one. I know we are supposed to have only two. The third one is AI security, because AI security is a huge topic, and we have so many really mature information security frameworks, of course, and now all of those additional AI security controls would need or will need to be added to information security controls in general. And this collaboration and this whole new field of machine learning security being added on general information security is a challenge, but also an emerging field where a lot of people invest a lot of time and effort. And I just want to recommend this OWASP AI exchange resources, because they have like a lot of controls, AI security controls for free on their website. And so those are the three topics that I think are top.
I agree. And the aspect of open and close, not only from a legal perspective, also in the tech arena, right? You see the recent lawsuits, so Elon Musk versus OpenAI, this whole thing of keeping open, and many interesting initiatives happening in the open source arena also. Very, very interesting. Thank you. So Ravit or Alexandra, who wants to continue?
I can hop in next. So as a privacy practitioner, the AI governance issues that usually stick in my mind are the ones that overlap with privacy, which doesn't necessarily narrow it down that much, because of course AI is a data dependent operation, right? But two hot topics that stood out to me as I was thinking about this are lawful basis of processing for training data. So for those that maybe don't deal with GDPR every day of their lives, in order to process personal data in the EU, you have to have a lawful basis. There are 6 laid out in the GDPR. 5 of them are relatively specific. And one of them is called legitimate interest, and it's much broader and involves a balancing test of saying, does the organization have a legitimate interest or a legitimate purpose to process this data that doesn't outweigh individual rights, liberties, freedoms, including privacy? And so the Italian Data Protection Authority, the Garante, has been really, really vocal in their opinion and investigation against OpenAI, who is using legitimate interest as their lawful basis for using personal data to train their large language models. So, they've gone as far as to ban ChatGPT in Italy, and so this is obviously like an existential issue for AI models, right? If they don't have a lawful basis to rely on, we're going to be in big trouble from a GDPR perspective. The other hot topic that I'll raise is related to that. It dovetails pretty well, I think. When we're talking about privacy and AI, I often say, like, we have the same problems we've always had, just at scale. And one example of that is there's been a lot of conversation in the privacy realm over the last at least decade that I've been in this industry about the kind of framework that privacy has been set up on, which is like transparency and consent or choice attached to that, right? And just this question of, I don't know a single privacy lawyer who has the time to read every privacy policy out there and make truly informed decisions about how they're sharing their data. So like, if we don't have time to do it, no one does. That's kind of how I look at it, right? And again, like, thinking about that in the scale of AI, there's just new dimension and urgency to that question of like, what should the structure of privacy be going forward so that we can inform the people that this data relates to how it's being used and give them choices.
Thank you. I totally agree. The legitimate interest thing, and I feel, at least from the European side, I saw that the ICO, they have, if you look at the UK's Data Protection Authority, they said that legitimate interest might be fine. So they are the only one that explicitly said, took
they're much friendlier than the Italians.
But at the same time, I just saw that they opened a consultation. So maybe they're not so sure anymore. And I know, as you mentioned, OpenAI, they mentioned in their website, so they are relying on legitimate interest because then you can go there and read what they say, why they think. I don't agree, and I've been discussing the newsletter, but I totally agree. From a privacy perspective, the legitimate interest topic is if you take it out, then we remain with contract or consent, basically. So it's right. I think super interesting. Ravit, would like to share some hot topics?
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, great to be here, and I really loved all the comments so far. So I feel really honored to be a part of this panel. I want to piggyback especially on what Kris had said. I really appreciated your points about the explosion of governance frameworks. And I think, this is a process we've seen since 2016 is when those frameworks started appearing. And then in 2019, there was also a movement of let's try to figure out what they all have in common, right? Like, what are those principles? And since then, we've only seen more and more of those frameworks. And a salient question is, how do we get companies to actually do those things in their frameworks? And how much of this is maybe ethics washing, right? Of a company wanting to appear good by having some kind of like guidelines framework, like guidelines, principles, frameworks, or whatever on their website versus actually doing it. So there's been an increasingly growing conversation about what people call operational. You see, I can't say this word. No one can. But operationalized AI ethics is how people talk about it sometimes. Like, how do you move from abstract ideas of how to govern AI responsibly to actually governing AI responsibly? Because there's a huge, huge gap. things that people typically see as signs of responsible governance of AI include, does the company have ethics principles on their website? Do they do any thought leadership? Do they have an ethics team? But the problem is, of course, having those things doesn't necessarily mean doing anything. And moreover, empirically, it's just not correlated. So, for example, I did this research study based on data collected by an ESG company called Ethics Grade. Anyway, they collected data from public disclosures of companies about their AI governance practices. And so we had 254 companies included in that. It was end of 2022. And we had just general companies, 76% of them indicated in their public disclosures that they had some kind of, one of those signals, like an AI ethics framework or like commitments. Half of them had those. And then like 76 had had either that or like a team or, stuff like that. But when it came to the actual practices that they did, it was abysmally low. So like things like, do they have, documentation of their like models or, an incident database, percentages were like, single digits. So we do have this gap between this explosion of frameworks and actually operationalizing it. I don't like that name, but that's the name that people use, like acting on it, implementing it. It's a huge gap that people are starting to notice more and more and more. Personally, that's the thing that I really find motivating in my work, trying to see how I can minimize that gap.
And on this topic of implementation, my guess is that the AI Act, when it enters into force, so even if it's approved now, it will take 2 years until the first possible infringement fine. I think it will have, my guess is that it will, at least in the more regulatory aspects, will happen similarly to what we saw with the GDPR, right? So 1 month before the GDPR, the enforcement date, everybody was moving and afraid of getting fined. So perhaps at least regarding the topics that are regulated by the AI Act, my hope is that we will see some global wave of compliance. So I hope not for the AI more AI ethics topic, they are not regulated. I cannot say that, but at least I hope for the topics that are covered by the AI Act.
I just want to, can I have a follow-up to that? I think, it's really interesting to see what's going to happen with the AI Act. Of course, one difference from GDPR is that the rules are not the same for all companies, right? Because of the risk categories. And they say that only like 5 or 10% of the companies are supposed to be in the high risk category. Companies are going to, I'm sure, fight pretty hard to say that they're not in that category, pretty much no matter what they do. And I think that complicates the impact on responsible AI governance. However, I also want to emphasize there's an additional movement that's happening in the enforcement of laws on AI. People pay like a lot of attention to those AI specific laws, especially, of course, the EU AI Act. But what we're starting to see more and more, especially in the US, is the enforcement of general laws on AI, right? In a sense, it's kind of surprising that people are trying to have like new laws about discrimination in AI. We already have laws about discrimination. It's already not allowed in the workplace in many forms, right? So there's a huge potential here to just, like, we already have laws. Can't we just implement them on AI? And so we're starting to see more and more of that, both from just lawsuits that we're seeing people submit, apply, whatever the verb is for lawsuits, but lawsuits that people utilize against AI companies just using the existing laws. And also in the US, the federal agencies are starting to be increasingly more proactive. So just one recent example, we saw, the facial recognition ban on Rite Aid following an investigation and a lawsuit from the Federal Trade Committee, like the FTC. So we are seeing more of that. So for me, when I think about like compliance, I think about the impact of growing enforcement of the regular, law system on AI. And I think in the short term, I expect that this would, and should drive companies to greater compliance.
Hope so. I will take from what you said about also implementation. So now we are moving to some more specific topics within AI governance. And let's talk a bit about implementation. And I'm asking this to Kristen and Katharina. So I would like to hear your take. So what are in your view, what are the biggest challenges when implementing AI governance in a corporate setting? And what are your recommendations in that case?
Yeah, for sure. I'm happy to chime in. So I would say high level across companies globally, there's a number of challenges when implementing AI governance in a corporate setting. I'll focus on three challenges in particular. I actually listed out, like just for full transparency, like 8. But I would take up literally the entire panel talking about like all the challenges that immediately come to mind. So I'll focus on the top 3. The first challenge is getting organizational buy-in. This can be a struggle for some. AI governance is most successful when you consider the tone at the top, a common compliance expression, where AI governance is considered as business critical by senior leadership, including your board and CEO. And it's important for leadership to understand what is AI governance. And from an organizational context perspective, it's a system or framework designed to direct, manage, and monitor the AI activities of an organization. And if you're looking for talking points for our discussions with leadership about AI governance programs serving a critical role as both a revenue protector as well as a revenue generator within an organization, I strongly recommend checking out Dominique Shelton-Lepzig's new book, Trust: Responsible AI Innovation, Privacy, and Data Leadership. It is so good. And she notes in that book that companies that win in the future will be the ones that consumers, international regulators, and business partners trust. So trust is a critical factor here. And that's why it's really important to articulate your why, like Simon Sinek style, in your discussions to get organizational buy-in. Like, why does AI governance matter? And it's more than just regulatory compliance. That's a key and critical factor. But it's really also about doing the right thing and tying your why back to your end users, your clients, your consumers, and the benefits intended for those individuals. And the second challenge I would focus on is on the point we're already discussing, which is how do you operationalize their ethical AI principles? How do you take a set of principles like fairness, explainability, and transparency and operationalize them within your organization? And it's one thing to have them on paper. It's another thing to operationalize them effectively, where you're in essence driving ethical AI behaviors across your organization. And every team member understands the role that they play in relation to your responsible or ethical AI program. And so I do recommend considering a set of ethical AI principles most applicable to your organization, especially keeping in mind any relevant regulatory requirements, clearly defining what they mean within the context of your organization, and work with a cross-functional, diverse team to establish a set of implementation guidelines mapped to each principle and a set of policies and procedures paired with each guideline. So you can look at it like an AI governance pyramid. You start with your principles, then your implementation guidelines, and then a detailed base of policies and procedures mapped to those guidelines and your principles. And once these are mapped out, you can visualize your entire AI governance program in one comprehensive chart or playbook, capturing the applicable written protocols, procedures, and requirements for each principle. And as an additional benefit, this effort can help companies isolate and pinpoint specific protocols within their program that require updates due to changes in organizational AI strategy or the regulatory landscape. And I'll give a quick example of an ethical AI implementation guideline. It could be a tailored version of the legal requirement itself. So let's say one of your principles is data privacy. A corresponding implementation guideline could focus on data minimization, where it says personal data collected should be relevant and limited to what is necessary in relation to the purposes for which it is processed in the AI system. And then you would have a set of policies and procedures in relation to operationalizing this particular guideline in relation to AI systems in your environment. And the third challenge I'll mention, and then I'll pause, is focusing on operationalizing privacy rights for certain AI systems. Privacy laws like the GDPR are technology agnostic, but there's a lot of discourse underway at the moment about opportunities from a privacy law perspective to cover AI system-specific risks and considerations. So consider, for example, the right to be forgotten. That is such a popular topic at the moment. What does that right look like from an AI system perspective, particularly if the system did not originally factor in privacy by design? Hopefully it did, but if it didn't, how do you account for that going forward? In addition to the removal of the data, what are implications from a training data perspective? And if you're using personal data for training purposes, how are you retraining the model after you're removing the data, and how does that impact the system? There's a lot of considerations in terms of how do you operationalize that right, including potentially retraining the model and so forth. I'll note briefly that Microsoft researchers noted in a recent article in relation to LLMs that unlearning isn't as straightforward as learning. Imagine trying to remove specific ingredients from a baked cake. It seems nearly impossible. Fine-tuning can introduce new flavors to the cake, but removing a specific ingredient, that's a tall order. And I love that quote. It is so spot on. So overall, as a recommendation, if you're an AI developer, it's critical to have a cross-functional council in place, including stakeholders from legal, compliance, InfoSec, data governance, engineers, like so many key stakeholders that should be a part of that discussion to think through these requirements and the best way to strategically operationalize them given your specific AI systems and the data flows involved. So that's just a few challenges that I could note. I would take up the rest of the time talking about the others that I've listed, but I would say those are the top three that come to mind at the moment.
Before Katharina speaks, everybody, this was great and dense. So do like me, everyone get a piece of paper. You heard everything that Kris said. So I'm seeing that perhaps I will have to share the transcript of this conversation because it's great, and many people, and also we need more multimedia screens so that you could draw the pyramid right with the principles. It would be really great.
I need a graph behind me. I need like a whiteboard, and I would just like write it up.
AI based.
Have one over here. I need to turn my camera. Yeah.
You see, if there's an entrepreneur in the audience, we need a start like an AI program that listens and already builds the pyramid behind her. So
I love it.
And for those in the audience, when we are speaking, if Kris or anyone or Katharina or Ravit and Alexandra mentions a book or a group, if you want to type in the chat, you're welcome to do it. We are focusing here on our notes, and so you're please welcome to add to the chat whatever you find relevant, whatever resource. Katharina.
Thanks. So challenges I see, so maybe more high level or practical. So I do see the challenge of having an AI strategy and having AI governance. How do those two things align? How do those two things like work together? Because I think AI strategy development or having an AI strategy, like how can I use AI to improve my KPIs, to cater to my business goals? How does this relate to AI governance? And because I think they're complementary and they're overlapping, but I do think that AI governance is a precondition, is a part of good management, and in that sense, a precondition for good strategy execution. And it also, I think, shows in practice when you have like machine learning engineers or data scientists who really want to solve problems, build stuff and improve KPIs, like help the organization grow and get that data analytics right and so on, get insights, and then you have this presumably burdening responsible AI or compliance topic, and I think this natural tension should get bridged in a sense of making very readable, practical policies, etc. And also the challenge is if you have AI, if you're talking about AI governance, not that we're always talking about the same thing. I, for example, talk about basically what you mentioned at the very beginning, Kris, ISO 42701 AI management systems or the NIST AI risk management framework. And I lost my train of thought. Yeah, that we talk about the same thing. And then the second challenge associated is, what do you prioritize? Like if you, for example, take 42001, there are so many required processes for really good AI management system in place. It's overwhelming. If you just buy the ISO standard, you're like, okay, that reads nicely, but it says this process, this documentation, and I'm currently working on translating those ISO 42001 requirements into processes and document templates, and it's like a yeast dough, the longer you look at it, the actually more it grows, because of course AI governance or AI management management needs to build on already some mature processes. So incident response policies, you don't have them in place yet, theoretically or practically, you need to actually have them as part of your AI management system, or change management if you don't have process in place. So all of those fundamental governance processes are also the basis for good AI governance. So it's super complex. And so when we talk about actually what would be some priority documents or some priority projects for AI governance, I think where we should start is actually what are really my AI assets, or have a model inventory. Such as in any risk management process, you need to actually first know what you want to protect and what are your assets. Then the AI policy is super important, and there are like in NIST, there are so many hints what should be in this AI policy. So that's already like kind of a challenge to write a policy that covers things and means something. And in my view, and in the view of ISO 42001, responsible AI principles, ethical, trustworthy AI principles are also as objectives, as AI objectives, part of this policy. Just saying. Then you need to really define roles and responsibility. I think this is one of the priority things. Then maybe have acceptable use policies for your users. You can have model cards and scorecards, something that is very often mentioned nowadays. And then, of course, you have this whole classic risk management process with a risk registry. How do you treat risks? And this needs to cater into your overall risk management in your organization. So my point is, challenge is, there's a lot that we can do in AI governance, but what are the priorities and how does this actually align with AI strategy, where it's more about use case discovery? How do I even find my proper use cases? And then how do I put them into practice? Do I have my own RAG with an open source model, or do I just buy something? So those things can be addressed then in a feasibility analysis and in the risk assessment. So this is where strategy and governance would then intersect to also help assess which use cases you should follow through with.
I love the connection with the strategy. As lawyers, we sometimes have this reputation of not thinking about strategy, right? We always say no, not allowed, not compliant, and I think especially within organizations, it's important to tie together, right? So let's think about something that will be innovative, that will be connected to the strategy and connected to AI governance.
And sorry if I just may add, because we're all coming from privacy. I think was this comment saying privacy as a business enabler. Practical example, Apple, always the same. So I think it's a totally different ballgame with AI, because there it's really true, because we want to use AI for business. Everyone knows we should improve things. So privacy per se, you have to really make an argument, but in AI, it's really not. So what do we even govern if we not first talk, what can we do? Where can it help? So it really needs to focus so much more on business, I think.
And it's great to see, for those that don't follow Katharina on LinkedIn, she basically almost every day she posts very interesting content, AI governance related, AI related, and it's great to know that she memorizes it. She's talking it by heart, some very specific things. So I love it. She not only posts and reads, she also memorizes. So follow all of us on LinkedIn, especially and here specifically on Katharina's point. If you want frameworks, she is the queen of frameworks. She will post every day something new and interesting. So I recommend Katharina's advice. And now I would like to move a little bit to AI ethics. And I feel that the AI ethics folks not always are the AI governance folks. And we are seeing some movement, AI governance and privacy, right? We are kind of merging maybe. And the IAPP is talking about AI governance. But the AI ethics, I feel it's a bit separate. So there is kind of a separation here, AI ethics people and AI governance people. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this intersection. So is the same thing. So for some people, maybe it's not obvious. So I want to ask Ravit and Kris. So how do you see the intersection of AI ethics and AI governance, both from a theoretical and practical perspective? And how should companies deal with AI ethics? So we're talking all about governance. So what about ethics? Is it separated? Is it together? Is it the same person, same people involved? So let's start with Ravit.
Yeah. The term AI ethics, I think, is not the best. to my knowledge, the history of this term comes from academia. That's where some of the discussions maybe started or were like had at some point. There are a lot of things people might mean by that name. So my background is philosophy. That's my PhD. It definitely is not ethics in that sense. It's not ethics in the philosophy sense. I mean, I guess some do it, but primarily that's not what. It's not primarily what people talk about. Primarily what you would hear in AI ethics conversations are things about the societal impact of AI, right? So it might also relate to, let's understand, why this algorithm discriminates, or like, what does it mean to be explainable, right? So you could have both theoretical questions about those concepts, and you could have questions about social impacts. You could also have things that would quote unquote would belong in like in a philosophy ethics class. But these are some of the conversations in AI ethics. The conversations about governance, in my mind, are just a part of the AI ethics discussion, right? And these could be conversations about how do you effectively do risk management for AI systems? What is an effective AI governance structure? So in my mind, AI governance is one of the themes that is discussed within AI ethics. AI governance is also maybe a concept that is more, you might hear it more in business contexts. I think in the business context, the term ethics can have negative connotations. Right. So one CEO of a startup told me, "You say ethics, I think of Plato." And I understand why, because there is a connection between ethics and Plato. But it does mean that the connotations might be that ethics is something like in the sky, ideals that are good, but maybe don't necessarily belong in the workplace. Because in the workplace, we care about revenue and we care about business, and like ethics is nice, but we can't really do that. So I think that is an unfortunate connotation that comes from just like associations of the word ethics. But really, AI ethics in the workplace really maybe almost merges with AI governance, because that's what they do. Like to ensure that the social impact of AI is not destructive is inherently bound with how you're going to govern AI ethics. How you're going to govern AI. So I think that you're right, Luiza, in terms of the population, there might be like people who would kind of brand themselves differently. But I think when it comes to businesses and workplaces, then AI governance just is AI ethics in many ways.
Great. I love this. Is a perfect philosophical and practical integration. And for those that don't follow Ravit, she also posts incredible AI ethics and AI in general content. So follow her. I think mainly on LinkedIn, right, Ravit, that you post. But follow.
I actually just started my mailing list also. So if people want to follow my mailing list, you should do so. I mean, I already have more than 1,000 people. So,
Kris.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to weigh in. I totally agree. When I think about AI ethics, I see it as focused on a set or system of moral principles and techniques focused on informing the development and responsible use of AI technology. It's focused on AI adhering to well-defined ethical guidelines regarding fundamental values, including individual rights, privacy, non-discrimination, and non-manipulation. Examples of AI ethics issues is everything that we're talking about. So that would include data responsibility, privacy, fairness, explainability, robustness, transparency, environmental sustainability, inclusion, moral agency, value alignment, accountability, trust, and technological misuse. And for the term AI governance, there is a broader definition of this term that speaks to a framework of laws and policies and ethical principles that guide the development, deployment, and use of AI technologies. And from this lens, AI governance is necessary to ensure that AI is developed and used in a way that benefits society while minimizing potential harm. Then there's AI governance, of course, within the context of an organization. And that's where we're focused on, and that's what we're talking about today. Within this context, AI governance is a system or framework designed to direct, manage, and monitor AI activities within an organization. And it's focused on operationalizing AI ethics principles and overseeing responsible development, deployment, and use of AI technology within an organization. So there's different ways of looking at all of these different concepts. But yeah, I totally agree in terms of the way that people talk about AI ethics versus like on the ground, the work associated specifically within an organization, for example, with AI governance work.
Thank you, Kris. I'd like to switch now to one of my perhaps my favorite topic nowadays, which is AI and privacy. This very interesting intersection. I think it's interesting from also from a professional perspective. Everybody now is seeing what will happen, right? So we are talking about AI governance, but who are the people that are going to govern AI? Are those the privacy people? And the privacy people want to govern AI. I know many in the audience here listening to us are privacy professionals, and we are seeing everybody in privacy. I see everywhere interested, but it feels like empty. If you say that you're specialized only in privacy, okay, and AI. So I see a lot this movement, this professional movement. And I think both from a theoretical, as Alexandra was talking about before about the legitimate interest and many theoretical and practical implications of AI systems. So the question is for Alexandra and Katharina. So AI compliance and privacy compliance, they might intersect, but not always. How do we recommend navigating AI and privacy compliance in a corporate setting? And what are the main challenges? So let's start with Alexandra.
This is a really big question.
Yeah.
So, like I said at the top of the call, privacy and AI really go hand in hand because AI inherently involves data, and privacy is all about data. I would approach implementing AI governance the same way I would approach implementing privacy in an organization, and that always starts with understanding the risk landscape, right? So different companies are going to be doing different things with AI, and they're all going to have very different requirements and risk landscapes because of that, right? A company that's developing AI tools for public release has a very different risk landscape from a company integrating AI into their own products, has a very different risk landscape from a company with a marketing team that wants to use ChatGPT, right? And by the way, I think everyone is probably in that last bucket. There was recently a survey that I read from Axios that 70% of employees were using ChatGPT without asking their bosses permit or telling their boss, like they figured their boss didn't know about it. So this is underway. It's already happening. And I think for many, many companies, it's really like harm reduction when we're talking about that last bucket of teams that are using, in particular, large language models in their daily work. So the way I would approach implementing this compliance is starting by doing diligence with the business, understanding the use cases of AI in the organization. That's always going to require cross-functional cooperation and collaboration. In like more than a decade of building privacy programs, I've never been proven wrong that that's the single most important thing. And I think, an important part of AI governance, especially when you're talking about, implementing like an AI use policy internally, is to remind folks that they're not in trouble, right? I think a lot of people think, oh, if I'm using ChatGPT to do my job, my boss is going to think like, why would I pay this person if they're just using ChatGPT? So I think it's important to have those conversations, in earnest. And Ravit actually shared a really great list of simple questions on LinkedIn that help the business, cross-functional teams understand whether the tools that they're using have AI behind the scenes, and it's not always obvious. So I highly recommend, finding that on LinkedIn and using that as part of the diligence with the business, and just understand like you should talk to every team. It's a cross-functional conversation, and it will take time. Once you have kind of an idea of what's happening with AI, then consider the risks to the organization. Assume that unless you've licensed versions of all of the AI tools being used, assume that whatever is being entered into a model is being used to train that model. And also understand that anything could be provided back in raw form, right? We've seen that recently where there was a prompt like, say company over and over, into one of the large language models, and it just spat back, like, was it source code or something that had been entered into the model. So, consider the risks to personal data, consider the risks to company confidential data, to source code. And, I think another important risk to call out for every company is talk to your HR team and evaluate whether they are looking at candidates with AI tools, because that's something that often happens behind the scenes that maybe HR teams aren't even aware of. Again, questions like Ravit had posted on LinkedIn are really good to kind of get to the bottom of what's happening there.
And Alexandra, on the survey you mentioned, what was the percentage? 70? And how much?
70. Yeah.
My guess is probably 100, but the people that assumed to the survey was 70. So I think people should assume everybody's using ChatGPT. There's so much pressure. Why are you not using ChatGPT for this, even for things that they should not be? And maybe we spoke in the past about AI policies. Maybe you want to share a bit about that, Alexandra. I think it's very specifically in these areas. My guess it would be 99.9% of people are experimenting with ChatGPT, and somehow it will intersect with professional functions, perhaps. So I remember in the past we spoke about AI policies, and it's a great way to communicate. Also to begin with the discussion, right? So you don't need to tell me if you're using ChatGPT or not. Just proactively for company. I think I saw we spoke about it. So this is our AI policy, and this is what you should think about. This and maybe you want to talk about it a little bit.
Yeah. So when I document AI policies for companies, I like to have things be simple wherever possible. So I usually use like a red, yellow, green approach, and you can call it something better than that, prohibited, reviewable, potentially allowable, something like that. And that just, tells the company, here's what we'll never allow. You can't enter sensitive customer data into a large language model, would be like a pretty obvious guardrail that you would put in place. And again, whatever the not allowable pieces will be dictated by the conversations that you're having with the use cases that are already happening and the risks that you've considered as a result of that, right? Yellow will be, okay, it might be allowed, but you need to have a conversation with whomever is running AI governance at the organization, legal, compliance, privacy, and really do a review of the proposed use case, why, what data is involved, just similar to how you would do a privacy review. And then green would obviously be what's already pre-approved. You're not entering personal data. You're using licensed versions of these tools that we've already said are okay. Go forth. And it's nice because that approach gives folks a little bit of runway while still implementing meaningful guardrails, and it's understandable. It's kind of modeled after the EU AI Act structure. So, it's flexible as things continue to evolve.
I love your
And
framework.
one other...
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, one other thing I'll just mention quickly is I'm starting to see technology tools. Like I always think about in terms of like people, process, technology, right? We've talked about who would run this. Process would be like a policy would be one example of that. And then I'm starting to see technology evolve that can act as like almost like a middleware within the organization, that if you want to use a large language model, you go to the middleware, it makes sure that, the tool that you want to use is approved, you're on the licensed version, it'll strip out sensitive data or personal data, or just kind of implement those controls. So for companies that have a lot of use of large language models, I think that's worth thinking about, just to kind of have some hard controls around the guardrails that have been implemented.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you for sharing it. And I love your framework, especially because of you're already educating people on the AI Act. So the colors and forbidden and risk, the different levels of risk. So if you're in the audience and you're looking for advice on AI policy, so contact Alexandra. She can give, she has a great experience with that. Katharina?
Yes, so privacy and AI. So where I was coming from like 3 years ago was when I realized, okay, there's this whole responsible AI, trustworthy AI, ethical AI ecosystem, and then there's privacy. And somehow they seem to be detached, while in fact, most of those responsible AI principles, including, of course, privacy, but also security, accountability, transparency, even non-discrimination, etc., are already covered by privacy regulation. I think this is still the case. But of course, AI processes not only personal information, but non-personal information. This is where it goes beyond privacy. And just staying with privacy for a minute, there are a couple of really exciting, maybe worrisome problems in AI related to privacy. One of the most interesting ones, I think, is machine unlearning. So how would we get like training data or the parameters based on training data that was used for training out of a model? It's a whole new research field of research. Or another question that I find extremely interesting is, when would we need to consider a model, maybe even personal data? Because if a risk assessment would result in that we see that it's kind of likely that a model leaks personal data, then wouldn't we need to consider the model itself personal data, which would, of course, be like a big issue. And then imagine the open source topic being, put in the same thought process as this, a model being personal data, open source everywhere. But apart from this, I think that AI governance goes well beyond privacy. So I really like this ISO 42001 standard, like we said, ISO AI management system. And this AI management system is almost 100%. I mean, it's more. It's a little bit, it adds a couple of things, but it's almost 100% identical to the structure of this very famous ISO 27001 standard for information security management systems. So if you already use or have a InfoSec management system in place, might it be NIST or might it be ISO, it's easy, or it's like the best starting point to add controls or other things like whistleblower policy or stuff for AI. So this is why I think that information security or IT in general is in my view, also because AI is so intrinsically technical, might be the better place for AI governance to sit, to coordinate, of course, with legal and with all the other business functions or other functions in the organization. I think it's a similar topic to how does privacy relate to data governance, because data governance is actually like bigger, right? Privacy is a subset of it, or is data governance is a precondition also for good privacy management. But it's similar to also privacy engineering. So we have all those privacy policies, legal policy conversations, but how do you actually put those principles, privacy principles like data minimization, into practice? This is then privacy engineering, and it's a huge field, but still a little bit under the radar, because there are a lot of techniques for privacy engineering that are not even that could be used, but they're not like asked for by the regulator, or people don't know about it or stuff. And so same thing here in AI, we have all those subsets for this responsible AI principles. How can you put them into practice? For example, with privacy preserving machine learning, the US even had a national strategy on privacy preserving data analytics and data sharing. So talking about differential privacy here and others like synthetic data and stuff. So it gets so technical then that I think it's good that it sits in IT in general and built on InfoSec programs. That's how I would go about it.
I didn't know that the AI ISO seems so similar to the InfoSec one, and it's, in your opinion, is that it should be more on the technical side. So let's see how it will be in practice. I think that the AI Act will probably give more, at least from the European perspective, more guidance, right, of the person, of the obligations of the AI team within an organization. But I think there are two main points. So some people, they think it should be more connected to the DPO and to privacy, right? So data protection impact assessment together. And it's interesting to hear your opinion that more different, so more to the IT or InfoSec department, less with the let's say, DPO side. So I think it's also it will have ramifications in the professional setting, right? Careers, what type of training the person has to have, or people involved with AI governance will have to have. Do they need to know how deep learning works? Do they need to know to be fluent on that, or no? They just need to know regulatory aspects and governance. So I think it's
so if I may just add,
yeah.
like exclusively all AI governance roles that I saw within the last 2 or 3 weeks, they required computer science degrees or something in AI machine learning. There was no, that was always in there. Okay, you might just catch up, you might upskill and then have this combination of skills. I think that's what it's needed, but where it sits, because there's so many privacy problems in AI that are unsolved, that I think like a lot of solutions, if we would really like look at them critically, they do not comply. How can a black box model ever really comply? And we just accept it nowadays because, I mean, we want to use it, right? So there's so much gray areas that I don't know if it really drives the business value that we also want to create. So, or how the risk tolerance, maybe the risk tolerance would be lower. So I think it's a business decision where it sits, depending on what you want.
And I would say also for computer scientists, it would be hard. They don't have this legal fluency, right?
Yes.
As a lawyer, and I'm in touch with many. It's different, right? We think different. Computer scientists and lawyers think very differently. Our brains work differently, and I think because there are so many critical issues also involving legal aspects, which will be GDPR related or AI Act related. You need to have this fluency that I don't think they're used to, right? People in computer science, they don't like to be the person fighting all the time. So it's perhaps so either one or so the computer science person will have to upskill in the legal and the legal
and frameworks, yes,
exactly,
and management, yeah.
So I think we will not have time to the sixth. So we have still 2 questions that we are a bit late. So let's see if we will have time for both. So question 5 is for Alexandra and Ravit. It's about AI regulations. So soon we'll have, it's still uncertain, but soon we'll have more clarity. So given the current regulatory background and also the uncertainty regarding global AI regulations, what are the best practices to navigate AI regulation and compliance now? So the AI Act, soon we'll have some more, we already have, right, the political agreement, so some sort of draft. And how should we navigate this regulation compliance? So let's start with Ravit.
Yeah, excellent question. A lot of people have this question on their minds. I would say, so a part of the complication is that we do have a lot of different regulations coming up in different jurisdictions, right? We have the EU, we have the UK, we have China, we have Canada, yeah, US, of course, and within the US, federal, states, cities. So really, it's kind of an explosion of different kinds of regulations and unclarity. So I would say maybe 2 things to keep in mind. One, right now, a lot of the regulation, the things that they require, I feel are kind of commonsensical. Don't discriminate, be transparent, right? And so I think a good way to prepare is just, use your regular common sense and think about, what might be problematic in the product that I am producing. Would be a wonderful starting point when considering AI regulation globally and how to prepare for that. But then also think about the current regulations that are central to your company. So if you're in healthcare, it might be HIPAA. If it's education, it might be FREPA. Whatever that thing is, think about whether and how that regulation might be impacted by your AI usage. So for example, if you're in the financial sector, you also have to give explanations. If you give loans and the loans get denied, you have to give explanations about whether those loans are denied. You have to give those explanations even if you had an AI-assisted decision. And so the second point, just to summarize, is think about how the current regulations that apply to you are impacted by your AI usage.
Okay, thank you, Ravit. So Alexandra?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that Ravit said. And Kris gave us a great summary at the top of the call about all of the regulations and the, what did you call it? A tightrope and a tornado. I think that's like a very
F5 tornado. Yeah.
yeah, I think that's a very good visual of where we are right now. And I think it's important to, like Ravit already said, implement best practices that align with, obvious principles around responsible AI and privacy. Understand which use cases are likely to be high risk for your business, depending on what you're doing and what data you have. And just be ready to pivot and be as flexible as possible and communicate to the business that everything is up in the air right now, so that, inevitably when things do change, it's not a total shock and surprise to the business, and there's some budget left over to implement different controls if needed.
And from your practice, you feel people are stressed, people are anxious? What's the vibe you're feeling, Alexandra?
Well, I think privacy professionals are mostly inured at this point to uncertainty and chaos in the legislative landscape. I mean, that's how I feel, at least. But, there is just a ton of uncertainty, and the technology, as always, is moving faster and faster every day. So I think there is definitely a collective, I think everyone's feeling that.
Okay, thank you. So thank you so much for coming here, everyone in the audience. So thank you for being so involved, being so active in the chat. For us, it's motivating. We are happy to see you involved with the discussion. Thank you for the guests. So Kris, Alexandra, Katharina, Ravit, thank you so much. I'm so glad you came. This was a wonderful session, full of practical insights. So we put together privacy, AI governance, AI ethics, ISO, InfoSec, risks. I think it was amazing and super valuable. Last reminder, if you want to join the bootcamp starting next week, write to me after the session, and we still have time for a few seats. Thank you, everyone, and see you in the next live talks. If you want to get informed about the upcoming live talks, next week I'm announcing the AI regulation live talk, so I will talk about it, and it will be in April. So thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. See you in the next live talk.